Hello guys, Shorya this side, and this is the first video on the psychology subject. And I don't even know if I should call it a video only or a lecture because I already told you in my introduction video that I'm not a teacher. I'm just teaching you all what I have been taught or what I'm learning in the past, what I've learned in the past few days. So yeah, let's start the lecture. Let's start the video. And also I'll be teaching you all these things from a PDF that I've made from a very little research I did on the subject on the topics that I'm going to teach you today. Okay. So yeah, let's start from a story from because only by this story you'll know that how did we get this word psyche. Okay, and how did this Cupid, Jupiter, Venus, you know about all these things. Okay, there's a story. And also I'll put all these pages here or here. I don't know, you'll see all these things in the edit in the final product. Okay, so let's start it. In the ancient Greek mythology, Psyche was a mortal woman whose beauty was so extraordinary that people began to admire her more than Venus. Now, who was Venus? Venus was the goddess of beauty herself. This made Venus deeply jealous as her worship and affection was slowly being taken away. Okay. Angered by this, Venus ordered her son Cupid to punish Psyche by making her fall in love with a terrible and unworthy creature. But these things do not work like this. However, when Cupid saw Psyche, he himself fell deeply in love with her. So instead of harming her, what he did was he secretly arranged a very beautiful home for her and visited her every night. But he placed a condition. Psyche must never try to see his face. That's the condition. For some time, Psyche lived happily and obeyed this rule, but during the day, when Cupid was away, Psyche felt lonely, and her sister were also allowed to visit her, and they filled her mind with doubt and fear. They suggested that Psyche's mysterious husband might actually be a terrible monster hiding in the darkness. Overcome by this curiosity and fear, Psyche decided to look at Cupid while he slept. What she did was that she used a candle to see her face. Okay, so using a candle, she saw that he was not a monster at all, but a very handsome and good-looking god. However, while gazing at him, hot wax from the candle accidentally fell on Cupid and woke him. Realizing that Psyche had disobeyed his command, and Cupid left her. Now, heartbroken Psyche began searching for him everywhere, and eventually, she went to Venus herself and begged to be reunited with Cupid. But Venus, still cruel, still jealous, gave Psyche a series of extremely difficult tasks, including a journey to the underworld to bring back a box of beauty from the Queen of Hades. She was doing it only because of she was jealous because she used to be called the beauty of Hades, but now the attention she used to get now has faded away because Psyche has taken all the attention of because of her beauty. Her maybe she was kind enough, maybe she was very kind also. That's why she also got all the attention. So let's move ahead. These tasks were impossible for a mortal woman. So just when Psyche seemed destined to fail, Cupid asked her Jupiter for help. Jupiter granted Psyche immortality, making her equal to the gods. And now the Psyche and the Cupid were reunited forever and their story happily ended. Now by around the 5th century BC, the Greek began to use Psyche as a symbol of the human soul. Over But over time, the word psyche came to mean not only the soul, but also the mind, the inner entity responsible for thinking, perceiving, remembering, and willing. Eventually, the mind became closely associated with consciousness or awareness. Now, today, the term psychology no longer carries that romantic side of the word psyche, but it still reflects its original meaning, the study of mind, soul, or consciousness. The idea that humans possesses a mind often suggests that thought allows human to rise above natural limitations, much like Psyche herself ultimately rose to equality with the gods. Now, on the definition of this psychology, soul versus mind, I have added some of the stories that will help me to make you understand the concept of all these things. Okay, the blind man and the elephant. Six blind men touch different parts of an elephant. One touches the trunk and says it's a snake. Another touches the leg and says it's a tree. Similarly, early scholars only saw parts of the human. the soul, the mind, and the body. Modern psychology is the attempt to finally see the whole elephant by combining behavior and mental processes. Now I have added some of the Indian stories, which is I have taken from the Puran. It is from the Katha Upanishad, and it says that imagine a chariot. The chariot is the body, the horses are the senses, the reins are the mind, and the passenger is the soul. In Hindi, we say Atma. Soul is said to be the Atma. So, this explains the scope of psychology perfectly. Like to understand why the chariot moves a certain way, you can't just look at the horses, the behavior. You have to understand the mind pulling the reins because that is how a whole chariot will work, will go ahead. Okay, now let's move ahead to the brief history of psychology. The origins of psychology stretch back thousands of years and are deeply connected with many forms of human knowledge. Folk traditions, magic, religion, philosophy, and science have all contributed to the development of psychology. Every culture likely developed its own explanations for human thoughts, actions, and events. However, most of what we know about the early history of psychology comes from the Greek philosophy. Just like I told you, in the 5th century, they did all these things. The concept of psyche, the word psyche, they were the first people who gave the concept. So, and while trying to understand the universe, Greek philosophers of the 6th century BC also discussed problems related to the human behavior and mental life. Now, early philosophers believed that all nature was alive. Movement was considered proof of life. For example, Thales believed that even a magnet had a soul because it could move iron. Anaximander suggested an early evolutionary idea, proposing that life arose from sun heated mud and that water was the basic substance of all matters. Heraclitus believed that the fire was the primary force and the substance of the soul because it caused movement and change. He argued that everything is in constant change and that order exists only in the pattern of change, which he called logos. See, Heraclitus also believed that knowledge comes through the senses. And this idea later influenced British empiricist philosophers and modern methods of conditioning and behavior modification. Now, Democritus proposed an atomic theory, okay, suggesting that both matter and human beings were composed of tiny moving atoms. He believed that different types of atoms were responsible for different bodily functions. He described the brain as the organ of thought, the heart as the source of anger, and the liver as related to diseases. He did not clearly separate thinking from sensing. Now, not all philosophers agreed that mind and body were governed by the same laws. Pythagoras and his followers believed in numbers as the basis of reality. They separated the soul from the body and believed the soul survived death and passed through reincarnation. The idea later influenced Christian philosophy and contributed to dualism, the separation of mind and behavior. Now let's talk about dualism a bit. Okay, I for this also I have added some two stories. Okay, so there's always been this struggle to understand if the mind and the body are one or separate. In Indian philosophical story, The Bird on the Tree, in the Rig Veda, there is a metaphor of two birds sitting on the same tree. One bird is eating the fruit. It can be associated with the body, experiencing the world, while the other bird simply watches the pure consciousness where the mind is just observing. And this helps explain dualism. One part of us acts while the other part observes and thinks. Now, according to the mythology, the story of Ganesha's head, when Lord Shiva replaces Ganesha's human head with an elephant's, Ganesha remains Ganesha. Like, this is the perfect metaphor for the mind body problem. And it says that is our identity located in our physical form, or is it the mind that says consistent even if the body changes? Now, Protagoras emphasized subjectivity. He argued that perception differs from person to person, even within the same person at different times. His famous statement was that the man is the measure of all things, and it reflects this belief. Now, on this topic, I'd love to tell you one more story. That in the Puranic story, the rope and the snake, if you have listened to it already, in the Advaita Vedanta, a very famous story describes a man walking in the dark who sees a coiled rope and screams. He thinks that it's a snake. His fear is real, as it should be. His heart rate spikes. It is a physiological issue. And now he runs back. It's a behavioral thing. But the snake exists only in his perception. This is the best way to explain that psychology isn't just about what is happening, but what the person thinks is happening. Plato strongly disturbed the senses, believing they provided only imperfect knowledge. He argued that true knowledge comes from the ideas and reasons, not observations. While this emphasis on reasons was influential, it also slowed scientific progress in psychology. Now, the Greek philosophy thus split into two broad traditions. One says that one emphasizing reason, theory, and innate knowledge, and the other emphasizing observation, experience, and learning. Most later psychological theories fall into one of these traditions. Now let's move forward to the Aristotle and the psychology, because he was one of the greatest scientists who has worked enough in the field of psychology. So Aristotle cannot be placed fully into either tradition. He valued both observation and reasoning. And because of his systematic approach to studying the mind, many scholars consider him the first psychologist. Aristotle believed that form and matter cannot exist separately. Similarly, he viewed the psyche as including both physical and mental functions. He described the three levels of soul. The first one is vegetative, which is plants. The second one is sensory, which is animals. And the third one is rational, which is human. Now, Aristotle's concept of the psyche was not religious or supernatural. These elements were added later by Saint Thomas Aquinas. Aristotle wrote about perception, memory, learning, emotions, and motivation. His laws of association, similarity, contrast, and conjugacy later became foundational in learning theory. His idea of catharsis influenced later psychological approaches such as psychoanalysis and play therapy. During the early Christian period and Middle Ages, psychological inquiry declined. St. Augustine emphasized introspection and believed that self knowledge was more reliable than sensory knowledge. He considered the will to be the core of the self. St. Thomas Aquinas later combined the Augustine's concept of will with Aristotle's concept of reason. He proposed a single soul with rational, sensory, and vegetative faculties. Now let's talk about this Descartes and dualism. Dualism, we have already talked about it. Descartes introduced a clear division between mind and body. He believed the mind was non-physical while the body followed the mechanical laws. However, he also believed that the two interacted. This dualism led to debate about whether knowledge comes from the mind or from sensory experience. Now let's talk about this empiricism and associationism. John Locke argued that the mind is a blank state. Tabula rasa is something, their slang. Okay, and all knowledge comes through the senses. Other British philosophers expanded the view, becoming known as empiricist and associationism. In contrast, Berkeley argued that reality exists within the mind, not in the external matter. Now I will explain you this concept of extremism, now the way we are doing through the story. Okay, so the idea that we are born as a blank state. Okay, so there's a story of the wild child of Aveyron. In 1800, a boy was found in the French forest who had grown up without human contact. See, he couldn't speak or act human. And this supports John Locke's idea that we aren't born with knowledge. Our environment and senses write our personality onto us. Now, on Indian perspective, the Gurukul tradition, in ancient India, students lived with teachers to learn through Anubhav. Anubhav is like direct experience. Anubhav is an Hindi word, but it is directly. Now, in Indian perspective, the Gurukul tradition, in ancient India, students lived with teachers to learn through their Anubhav. What is Anubhav? Anubhav is an Hindi word which says that it is a like experience. Like the English pronunciation of Anubhav is experience. Okay, it is also written the direct experience. So let's move forward. Okay, so they didn't just read about fire, they gathered the wood and lit it. This illustrates empiricism, that true psychology must be based on what we observe and experience, not just theory. Now let's talk about this physiology and the scientific term. In the 19th century, psychologists contributed greatly to psychology by saying brain functions, reflexes, and sensations. Scientists such as Broca, Helmholtz, Scanoff Frencher, Donders, Ebbinghaus introduced experimental method that allowed mental processes to be measured scientifically. And now let's talk about this man, William Wundt, and the birth of psychology. Now in 1879, William Wundt was the first. Now in 1879, William Wundt was the first man who established the first psychology laboratory at Leipzig in Germany. He studied conscious experience using he studied conscious experience using introspection. His work marked the official beginning of psychology as a scientific discipline. Now again, the story time. On the evolution of thought, how, like, let's talk about like how we move from instinct to reason. In our mythology, the Dashavatra, the 10 incarnation of Vishnu can be seen as a metaphor for the evolution of psyche. It starts with Matsya, life in water or instincts, moves to Narsinga, half animal, half human, and eventually to Buddha, pure entitlement and consciousness. And this mirrors the level of the soul Aristotle talked about, from basic survival to high level reasoning. Now let's talk about this later schools and modern developments. Psychology soon diversified. Now Gestalt psychology emphasized wholes over parts. Pavlov developed conditioning. Functionalism grew in America under William James. Behaviorism emerged under Watson. Psychoanalysis developed through Freud. Mental testing advanced through Galton and Bennett. Now, how are we using this psychology to solve our life's problems? Let's talk about this on modern psychology. And we are talking about it on Gita's perspective. Okay, like Krishna and Arjun, writers from the very holy text Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is often called the first great counseling session. Arjun is experiencing a psychological breakdown, trembling, anxiety, confusion. Krishna doesn't give him a medicine. He uses cognitive behavioral techniques. He changes the way Arjun perceives his duty and the world, which eventually changes Arjun's behavior. Now, let's talk about the psychology in India. Psychology in India evolved from philosophy but later became an independent discipline. Early laboratories were established in Calcutta and Agra. Indian psychologists played a key role in giving psychology scientific recognition in India. Now let's talk about some various definitions of psychology, because there is no just one definition. Every scientist has given their own definition to this subject. Okay, so let's go through all this. Now psychology occupies a central position in our attempt to understand the behavior of all living beings. It developed gradually from philosophy and later became an independent scientific discipline. Interestingly, the word psychology itself reflects the historical journey. The term psychology is derived from two Greek words. The first one is psyche, meaning soul or spirit, and the other one is logos, which means study or disclosure. Thus, in its earliest sense, psychology literally meant the study of the soul. However, this definition soon created problems, and the soul could not be observed or measured scientifically. Because psychology aimed to become a science, it needed a subject matter that could be studied objectively. Therefore, the focus shifted from soul to mind. Psychology then became known as the study of mind, but again, the mind could not be directly seen or measured. Later, psychologists emphasized consciousness, defining psychology as a study of consciousness experience. This included sensations, feelings, and thoughts. Yet, this approach also had limitations because consciousness is private and difficult to study scientifically. And with the rise of behaviorism, the emphasis shifted once more. Psychology was then defined as the science of behavior, focusing only on observable actions. And this made psychology more objective, but it ignored internal mental processes such as thinking, dreaming, and imagining. And now, finally, modern psychology adopted a very balanced and more comprehensive definition. Today, psychology is best defined as the scientific study of mental processes as expressed through behavior and experienced directly by the individual. I hope now you understand what psychology actually means. And by this definition, it also means that psychology studies observable behavior, internal thoughts, emotions, attitudes, values, and experiences. Thus, psychology now combines both objectivity and subjectivity, making it a complete science of human and animal behavior. Now, let's talk about this scope of psychology. The scope of psychology is closely related to how we define it. The broader the definition, the wider the scope of the subject. If psychology is defined only as a study of conscious experience, then its field becomes very limited. It would include only what a person is aware of. And similarly, if psychology is defined only as a study of behavior, then many important internal mental processes would be ignored. However, when psychology is defined as the scientific study of all mental processes and their expression in behavior, its scope becomes very wide and comprehensive. The psychologist's task is to now see that there are many tasks that psychologists have to do, and one of those tasks is very first task is to identify different types of mental processes, to analyze them into simpler components, and discover the laws and the principles that explains their origin in the development. Psychologists study processes such as perception, learning, memory, thinking, emotion, motivation, personality, and at the same time, many mental processes can be understood through bodily behavior. For example, we infer fear from trembling or sweating. Therefore, knowledge of the body and nervous system is also important. Modern psychology tries to explain mental activities by referring to psychological and neurological changes, especially those recurring in the brain and the nervous system. Because psychology deals with both mind and behavior, and its application are extremely wide. Like it is useful in education, industry, medicine, counseling, sports, social life, and everyday personal adjustment. So the scope of psychology is not fixed, it is broad, expanding, and continuously developing as new discoveries are made. Okay, so we are done with the topics of today's lecture, and I hope you understood all these topics very clearly. And if you have any doubt, do let me know in the comment section, because and then there I'll be seeing your comment and I'll be replying you with the answer only. And so yeah, I hope you understood all these things, and this is the series that we are going to continue. Okay, so do subscribe for the lecture 2, and I'll be also uploading lectures on the philosophy, on self-help books, and on the research paper that I've been reading. Okay, so this is what we had for today's video. I hope you liked the video. I hope you subscribe it, like it, and so yeah, let's meet in the next video. See you.